At 2 a.m., the security camera captured something so strange that the jewelry shop owner had to rewind it again and again, just to be sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. In the stillness of the night, a 7-year-old boy crawled out from beneath the glass counter. Clutching an old coat like a blanket, he curled his knees close to his chest, as though trying to fend off the biting cold. He yawned, stretched his small frame, and then quietly wiped away his own footprints with a damp cloth before slipping back under the counter. The owner was certain he had never hired anyone like this. None of his employees had children. And his shop, fortified with 2 layers of steel doors, had no possible entrance for a child to sneak inside. The following morning, when the police arrived and pulled the boy out from under the display case, he didn't cry. He asked just one question. "Did I break anything?" "Please, don't tell my dad." When the officers asked his name, the boy hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, he pulled out a tiny golden ring, its inscription nearly worn away. "For Avel, son of Dorian." Everyone turned to stare at one another. Even Dorian Vega, the shop's owner, froze in place, because Dorian had never told a soul about losing his son 5 years ago, and no one knew that the boy's name was Avel. So where had this child come from? How did he know that name? And why did he seem so terrified at the mere mention of his father? Dorian Vega lived in a world designed never to change. Every morning, he rose at exactly 6:15. He brewed his own black coffee with an Italian-French press, opened the window to the back lawn trimmed like a chessboard, and turned the radio to his favorite classical station, instrumental, wordless, memoryless. His jewelry store, Vega's Legacy, stood at the corner of Main Street. Dark wooden walls. A sign of old gold lettering polished so clean it seemed as though even time itself dared not step inside. Dorian had once been the kind of father who had everything: prestige, wealth, a beautiful wife, a cherished son. But after the accident 5 years ago, the day people said his car skidded off the road and his only child, Avel, was swept away by the river, he hadn't truly lived. He merely operated a mechanism called existence. He never spoke of Avel. Never allowed anyone to mention the accident. No photographs remained in the house. Each time the name Avel brushed someone's lips, Dorian changed the subject, as casually and coldly as if the past had never existed, switching to gold prices or the weather. His young staff whispered about him as a good man, but distant. He never raised his voice. He never laughed out loud. He never told stories. A flawless boss, a flawless corner shop, a flawless life. Until that morning, when police called him to the storefront about a child discovered beneath the display case, the one thing not part of the design. The boy had no name, no documents, no trace of breaking in, only a tiny ring with its fading words. For Avel, son of Dorian. Dorian froze when he saw it, because he had buried that ring with his son. He was certain. His own hands had placed it into Avel's small, cold fingers 3 days after the accident, before the coffin was sealed. "Do you recognize him?" one officer asked. Dorian shook his head. "I don't know who that boy is." But his trembling hands betrayed him. A hairline fracture had formed in the carefully painted picture he replayed each day to avoid remembering. The child was taken to a medical station for examination. Meanwhile, Dorian remained in the shop, standing frozen beside the glass case where the boy had once slept. How had he gotten inside? How had he held that ring? And most of all, why did this boy look so hauntingly like Avel, from the glimmer in his eyes to the faint scar on his left wrist? That night, long after closing, Dorian stayed behind in the shop. The iron shutters had been pulled down. The streetlights outside were dark. No one remained, except him, and a wooden box hidden in the drawer beneath the cash register. A box untouched for 5 long years. He slid it out, blew away the dust, and ran his fingers over the tiny lock. It wasn't hard to open, but he had never dared, not since Avel's funeral. Dorian sat, one hand resting on the lid, the other clutching the small key. For several seconds he didn't move. His hand shook faintly, as though the act of unlocking it would shatter the fragile illusion he had built for half a decade, that he had forgotten, that he had moved on, that it was over. He once believed silence meant forgetting, that by refusing to keep photos, he would never remember. But that little ring, the one carried by the boy in his store, had cracked the ice he'd laid over his mind. At last, he turned the key. Inside lay only a handful of items. A faded Polaroid of Dorian cradling a 3-year-old Avel. A small wooden toy car, one wheel broken. A folded note. Today I am no longer afraid of the water. I walked out into the lake. A pencil sketch, messy and childlike. A house, a tree, 2 figures holding hands. Dorian gripped the drawing so tightly the paper wrinkled in his fist. He had once believed memories, buried deep enough, would vanish, but they hadn't. They had only changed form, into a rope tightening around his throat whenever he heard children laughing on the street. A snap echoed in the silence, the toy car's wheel, broken clean off in his hand. He hadn't meant to. It was instinct, the eruption of anger bottled up for years. Anger at his son for leaving him. Anger at himself for losing control of the wheel that day. Anger at a world that never proved he hadn't done it on purpose. Because deep inside, he had asked himself 1,000 times, if I had braked sooner, would it all have been different? No one had ever heard Dorian cry. No one had seen him break. But that night in the empty shop, the man once called unshakable sat against the wall, clutching the broken toy car, and wept like a child. The next morning, Dorian still arrived at the shop on time. His face carried its usual mask, tidy, stern, but his hand gripped the coffee cup so tightly, his knuckles had turned white. The police had taken the boy away the day before to clarify his identity. Yet inside Dorian, clarity had already arrived, earlier than any DNA test could provide. The boy was Avel. But why was his son still alive? Who had raised him all these years? And more haunting, why had he been returned here? To sleep beneath his father's own counter. At 10:23 a.m., a new employee named Kyle placed a stack of receipts on the counter. Dorian flipped through them absently until one name stopped him cold. Avel Vega, children's silver necklace, $39. The timestamp read 4:02 a.m. the previous night, long after the store had closed. No cameras had recorded the transaction. No staff had been scheduled. No one could explain how the receipt had been printed. And below the name, in a shaky scrawl, the delivery address read, Cabin 11, Redwood Camp, behind the dried lake. Redwood Camp. An abandoned campsite closed more than a decade ago, 40 minutes outside town. Once the scene of an unsolved mass disappearance, a place no one mentioned anymore, except in children's ghost stories. Dorian's breath caught. The handwriting was jagged, but chillingly familiar. Not a staff member's, not a policeman's, not a stranger's. It was Avel's, his son's handwriting, from 5 years ago. The receipt wasn't just a phantom transaction. It was a message, a direction, a challenge. And what froze Dorian to the marrow wasn't the address. It was the faint, penciled note scratched beneath it. If you find this place, it means you are still my father. Dorian's fist crumpled the paper. Every illusion of normal life collapsed. The boy knew everything. How to enter the shop, about the ring, who his father was, and most of all, where he had been kept. Dorian locked himself in his office. For the first time in 5 years, he opened the drawer and pulled out the rusted car key, the very key to the car that had plunged into the river. The car the police had said carried Avel to his death, the current sweeping his body away. The car Dorian had believed his own mistake had doomed. But if Avel had survived, who had pulled him from the water? Why had he been hidden for 5 years? And why had he been returned now, of all places, to his father's shop? That question was what pushed Dorian into a game he had never chosen to play. And Cabin 11, behind the dried lake, that was where it would begin. 3 days after the incident of the child in the jewelry store, the town of Calverton no longer felt as calm as it appeared. News spread like wildfire. Local newspapers blared headlines. Mysterious child found in gold tycoon's shop. Shares the name of his drowned son. Others were harsher. Dorian Vega, grieving father or master deceiver. Dorian gave no statements to the press. He skipped the Merchants' Council meeting, his first absence in 11 years. Meanwhile, the police confirmed the boy's identity. They did not release his name, but quietly admitted they had evidence of a blood relation to Mr. Brandt, Vega. An official investigation was launched. Strangely enough, the one under scrutiny was not the child, but Dorian himself. The reasons were cruelly simple. 5 years ago, no one but Dorian had been in the car when the accident happened. No body had ever been recovered. And now, a child bearing his son's inscribed ring had appeared in his store. Coincidence was no longer believable. The more Dorian resisted, the faster suspicion spread. Kyle, the youngest employee, handed in his resignation. "I don't think this environment suits me anymore." The delivery driver refused further orders, afraid of being dragged into some scandal. Even Marjorie, his late wife's closest friend, who had stood by him through Avel's funeral, visited him in private and whispered, "I defended you for 5 years, Dorian. But if this boy truly is Avel, then you've hidden far too much from us. I didn't know my son was alive. I swear it." "Swear?" Marjorie's laugh was bitter. "What promises have you kept since that night?" That same afternoon, Dorian's phone rang. The voice was hoarse, barely more than a growl. "Stop, Mr. Vega. Stay away from Cabin 11 if you want silence to protect you." Before he could reply, the call ended. And hours later, police stormed his store with a sudden warrant, on suspicion of child confinement. They found nothing. Yet it was enough to stoke more whispers. Outside, people stared. Some pointed. Some recorded him on their phones. Someone even pasted a crude note on the shop door. "Give the boy back to whoever truly deserves him." That was the moment Dorian understood. No one believed him. Not the police. Not his friends. Not the community that once held him up as a model of success. No one wanted the truth. They only wanted silence. No one, except one. The boy. The child who had written the receipt, left the address of the cabin, and whispered, "Don't let my father know." Perhaps Avel had been brainwashed. Perhaps he had been held captive. Perhaps, for 5 long years, someone had built a false world around him, teaching him to fear the man who gave him life. But Dorian could prove nothing, unless he went to Cabin 11 himself. That night, when the streets had gone dark, Dorian left the jewelry store. No tie, no coat, only a worn backpack, inside of which lay the strange receipt with its haunting address. He told no one, left no note, called no lawyer. There was only one destination. Cabin 11, behind the dried lake, Redwood Camp, abandoned since 2010, nearly 50 kilometers away. GPS showed no clear route. Dorian relied on an old paper map and the half-forgotten memory of their last family vacation 12 years earlier. At 2:48 a.m., he parked by the thick forest. The air smelled of wet leaves and decay. The pale moon above hung like a suspended blade. Each step along the trail felt like a descent into a past he wasn't ready to face. After half an hour, cabin 11 emerged, rotting wood, peeling walls, windows boarded shut. No light, no sound, no sign of life. Dorian approached, his hand trembling as it touched the doorknob. Locked. Of course. He stepped back, scanning the shadows, his breath frosting in the cold. No cars, no paths, no trace of movement. It seemed hopeless until his phone buzzed in his pocket. No name. The clock read 3:07 a.m. He answered, his heart stalling. Hello? Silence. Then a whisper, small, shaky, laced with fear. Dad. Dorian's voice failed him. If you're at the cabin, don't use the front door. There are cameras, traps. I can't speak loud, but I left something behind the house. Only you will recognize it. Avel, is it really you? Where are you? I can't say, but I remember you. I'm sorry. The line cut. Dorian stood frozen. The wind carried the stench of rotting wood, but he no longer felt cold. No longer doubted. His son was alive, and he still remembered his father. Circling behind the cabin, Dorian swept his flashlight over trees and rocks until he spotted a rusty tin can tucked inside a hollow. Inside it lay a folded note and a strand of red string. The note read, "Only Dad would remember. This is the ribbon I used to tie Mom's doll's hair. She hated it. You laughed. I hid it in my pillow. If you find it, I'll know you're still my dad." Dorian clutched the string, tears stinging his eyes. That tiny, ordinary memory, meaningless to anyone else, was proof. Proof that Avel had never forgotten. No stranger could have invented it. No captor could have forged it. Only Avel. He was here. He remembered. And he needed saving. At dawn, Dorian returned to town, clothes muddy, hands clutching the red string and the note from cabin 11. He walked straight into the police station and demanded to see the officer who had once overseen the missing child case, Lieutenant Haran. "You remember the case of Avel Vega, don't you?" Dorian asked, his eyes unblinking. Haran froze, as though staring at a ghost from the past. "I remember. All too well." Dorian laid the string and the folded note on the desk. "My son is alive. The boy in the jewelry store. That was him." Haran frowned. "You're telling me you didn't kill your own child?" Dorian shot to his feet. "You've believed for 5 years that I did. Do you really think I staged a midnight break-in, forged a receipt, and called myself from the woods just to keep the lie going?" The lieutenant stayed silent. From his coat, Dorian pulled a folded birth certificate. The original had been tampered with in the town's records, but this was a copy he had locked away 7 years ago. Haran's eyes narrowed. "The mother's name doesn't match what's in our files." "Exactly," Dorian said. "Because your records were altered, and the one who altered them was Emma." The air thickened. Emma, Dorian's ex-wife. The woman believed to have lost her mind after their son's accident. The woman who had supposedly left town 4 years ago for a psychiatric retreat. But Dorian had just learned no such retreat had ever housed an Emma Vega, and the address on the mysterious receipt, cabin 11, had once belonged to Emma. It was the very cabin their family had used every summer. "She didn't lose her mind," Dorian continued. "She planned it. For 5 years, I've been stripped of my son, because we all believed he died in my hands." Lieutenant Haran went pale. He had once been Emma's close friend. And now, doubt began to flicker in his eyes. "Why would she do this?" he whispered. "Because she thought I betrayed her. She believed I had another woman, that I wanted to kill them both and start a new life. But I had no affair. The woman she saw was just a customer buying a wedding ring." Dorian's voice dropped, heavy with pain. Emma wasn't insane. She was obsessed. and she dragged Avel into her obsession, hid him, taught him to fear me. For 5 years, she built a false world in which I was the monster. But now, he's remembering. He's fighting back against the lies she planted. It had been Emma who staged Avel's drowning. Emma who spirited him away through the cabin's hidden passage. Emma who falsified records and forged signatures. Emma who planted the receipt, testing whether Dorian was still worthy of being called father. And now, Avel, trapped between two realities, was beginning to remember the truth. Dorian returned to cabin 11, this time without secrecy, without disguise, without weapons or evidence. Only 2 bare hands, and one question that had burned inside him since the night Avel vanished. How does a father reclaim his child without destroying him all over again? He walked straight to the front door. The cameras still watched, but he didn't stop. At the top of the steps, the door creaked open, just slightly. For the first time, Avel stood there, a strand of red string in his hand, eyes wide, as though he had waited his entire life for this moment. Behind him stood Emma. Her hair was streaked with silver, her beauty weathered, but her eyes unchanged, luminous, and unhinged. "I knew you'd come," Emma said softly, her voice like a lullaby. "Avel once believed in you. I taught him to forget. But now, he remembers. I can't control it anymore." "You don't need to control it," Dorian answered. "You only need to admit what you've done. Avel never died, and you were never insane. You only chose a vengeance no one would dare imagine, burying the truth in the name of motherhood." Emma smiled. No denial, no excuse. "I only did what a mother must, protect her child from the man she believed could harm him. You were wrong, but that doesn't matter anymore." Dorian stepped forward. Avel's gaze wavered between them. A 12-year-old boy, unable to tell which was truth, which was lie. "Do you want to know the truth?" Dorian asked, kneeling until his eyes met his son's. "Dad," Avel's voice shook. "If the truth means losing both you and Mom, can I refuse to hear it?" The words cut like a blade. A child who wanted to lose no one, to choose no side, to be loved, without a battlefield drawn between his parents. Dorian turned to Emma. "Keep your anger. Let the whole town condemn me, but don't force him to endure another separation." For the first time in years, Emma's eyes welled with tears. Avel stepped closer to Dorian. No embrace, no sobbing, just a hand, small and trembling, slipping into his father's. "Don't press charges against Mom," Avel whispered. "I don't need anyone to win. I just need my dad." Dorian understood. Vengeance would solve nothing. To drag Emma into the light would shatter the last fragment of memory Avel still cherished. A mother who raised him, even if through twisted means. Truth, justice, freedom. They could all wait. But not at the cost of his child's fragile heart. He led Avel out of the cabin. Emma did not stop them. She only stood, watching in silence. "You will face the law," Dorian told her. "But I promise, our son will never see you in handcuffs." "Thank you for still being a father," she whispered. 3 months after Cabin 11 stood abandoned, Calverton returned to its outward calm. But beneath that calm lay something changed. Not truth, but silence. Emma was not arrested immediately. After medical evaluations, she was placed in a rehabilitation center. Dorian filed no charges. Instead, he left her a single letter. "I forgive, not because you deserve it, but because our son deserves peace." Avel came home with Dorian. He was not whole. Sometimes he woke in the night trembling. Sometimes he flinched when strangers spoke his name. But each day, a little light returned to his eyes. He went back to school, kicked a ball with neighborhood kids, learned to choose his own meals, began to ask his own questions. One evening at dinner, Avel asked, "Dad, do you ever get tired of always trying to be good?" Dorian thought for a while, then answered, "Yes, but what's worse is letting someone else decide who you are." Avel nodded slowly, as though that was the answer he had been waiting for all these years. Weeks later, Dorian visited the old cabin one last time. He left behind a photo album. Inside were pictures Avel had never seen, of him wearing a backwards cap, grinning wide, racing through the jewelry shop as a child. The final page held a new photo, father and son, beneath the same tree where Avel had first learned to ride his bike. Below it, Dorian had written, "The past cannot be changed, but we can sit together and choose how to tell it, so that the child within us no longer feels like someone's mistake." Final message. There are children who don't need saving, only to believe that someone would still come back for them. And there are fathers who are no heroes, but they do not walk away, because sometimes staying is the bravest act of all.